Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Rain was falling heavily on the streets of New York, turning the sidewalks into dark mirrors. The streetlights reflected off the asphalt, casting flashes of gold and silver onto the building facades. Ethan Carter, a millionaire accustomed to excess and security, strode briskly toward his black limousine parked a short distance away. His day had been long, meetings, contracts, negotiations, but tonight, something would shatter his routine. A trembling figure caught his attention. A young pregnant woman, alone, was trying to cross a crowded street, clearly panicked by the heavy traffic. She was wearing a coat too light for the rain and seemed to hesitate, her rounded belly a fragile reminder of the life she carried. Ethan felt an impulse he didn't immediately understand. He ran towards her to protect her, ready to ward off any danger. But at that precise moment, a heart-rending scream rang out. "Don't get in the car." The scream came from a boy, a child of about 12, running along the sidewalk, his eyes wide with fear. His voice carried the urgency, the awareness of imminent danger. Ethan, focused on the woman, paid it only a fraction of a second's attention. Time seemed to slow down. The pregnant woman slipped slightly, and Ethan caught her. But a metallic crash followed almost immediately. Another vehicle, speeding on the wet pavement, struck the boy. Jason Miller's body was thrown against the sidewalk. Ethan ran towards him, rain streaming down his face, but he already knew, the boy was no longer moving. His cries still echoed in the air, but the sound was now tragically pointless. In that suspended moment, Ethan felt a first wave of guilt, a shock that would shake his entire world. He had just discovered that wealth and power could not protect everything, and that sometimes, even the strongest were powerless in the face of life's fragility. Ethan Carter remained frozen, kneeling beside the boy's lifeless body. The rain was still falling, but now it seemed cold, icy, as if the sky itself shared his pain. Sirens were approaching, but their distant sound seemed unreal, as if the whole world had stopped around him. The pregnant woman he had just protected was trembling, clutching her stomach in anxiety. Thank you," she murmured between sobs, unable to comprehend the horror that had just unfolded. Ethan didn't respond. His mind kept replaying the boy's cry, "Don't get in the car." Why the cry? Why hadn't he reacted? A few passers-by began to gather, their faces contorted with curiosity and anguish. A woman shouted for an ambulance to be called, while a man shook his head and murmured, "So young, why?" Ethan felt his heart sink. He knew about money, power, contracts, but he had never been confronted with something so brutal and final. Jason Miller, the child, lay there, and nothing could change that moment. When the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedics rushed in, but there was nothing more they could do. Ethan stepped back slightly, trembling. A dull guilt washed over him, deeper than anything he had ever known. He had been there, right in front of him, and yet, he had failed. That night, as the rain washed over the streets, Ethan understood something no amount of wealth could buy: life is fragile, and sometimes, even the most powerful are powerless. He made a silent promise, a promise that would change his life forever. He would find out who that boy was, why he had screamed, and how he could honor his memory. The next morning, Ethan Carter sat in his office, his head against the window, watching the rain finish falling on the Manhattan skyscrapers. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues, assistants, and business partners. But none of them really mattered. His mind was obsessed with the boy's face, Jason's, and with the scream he hadn't heard in time. He knew he had to find out. Who was this boy? Why was he shouting? Ethan wasn't one to leave mysteries unsolved. So he called Lucas Reed, a private investigator renowned for handling the most sensitive and discreet cases. "Lucas, I need your help," said Ethan, his voice deep and tense. "Of course, Mr. Carter. What is it about?" "A boy, a child. He died last night. I want to know who he was. I want to know why he screamed." Lucas nodded silently, understanding that this investigation would be anything but ordinary. He began by questioning passers-by, checking surveillance cameras, and scouring social media for any information about the child. Gradually, a portrait began to emerge. Jason Miller, 12 years old, lived in a modest neighborhood in Brooklyn with his parents and his little sister, Lily. Courageous, considerate and surprisingly mature for his age, he was known for protecting those he loved, sometimes at the risk of his own safety. Ethan listened to Lucas's reports, each detail hitting him harder than the last. He discovered that Jason's cry wasn't just an impulsive warning, he had anticipated real danger. Jason knew the street was dangerous, that some cars were speeding. His action was an act of bravery, a last-ditch effort to protect someone's life. This truth struck Ethan with an almost painful intensity. The child had succeeded where he, a rich and powerful man, had failed. Guilt gnawed at him, but at the same time, he began to feel a profound respect for this unknown boy. That evening, Ethan made a decision. He had to meet Jason's family. He had to understand the world he had barely touched upon, a world where courage did not depend on money, and where every life, even the youngest, had immense value. Ethan Carter arrived in the modest Brooklyn neighborhood, a world he barely knew. The buildings were old, the sidewalks narrow and cracked, and the smell of fresh bread and coffee mingled with the city's stench. He parked his car and took a deep breath. What he was about to do made him uneasy, meet the parents of a boy he had never known, but for whom he felt responsible. He knocked on the door and was greeted by a woman with tear-reddened eyes. It was Rebecca Miller, Jason's mother. Beside her stood a man, Tom Miller, his jaw clenched, his face drawn with fatigue and grief. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "Hello. I'm Ethan Carter. I want to talk to you about your son," he began awkwardly. Rebecca stared at him, wary but exhausted. "You are, who?" Ethan recounted the story, his presence at the time of the accident, Jason's scream, and his sense of responsibility. The parents listened in silence, their eyes fixed on the floor. The pain was palpable, almost physical. Tom finally burst into tears. He always wanted to protect his sister. He cried out to save her, and nobody listened to him. Rebecca collapsed into Tom's arms. Jason was such a brave boy, so intelligent. Ethan felt his heart sink. He had before him proof that bravery and sacrifice could come from the youngest souls, and that his wealth was worthless in the face of this reality. He knelt down, as if to get closer to them. "I know I can't bring Jason back. I can't erase what happened, but I want to help. I want to look after Lily. I want to make sure your daughter has everything she needs to grow up safe." Rebecca looked at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why would you do that? You don't even know us." Because Jason screamed to save a life. And I want his sacrifice to have meaning. I want his bravery to live on through Lily." A heavy silence fell, broken only by the sound of the rain gently fading away. For the first time since the tragedy, there was a sense of possible solace. Ethan had found a purpose, a way to honor Jason's memory, and perhaps, to redeem himself a little in the eyes of the boy he hadn't been able to protect. In the days that followed, Ethan Carter felt trapped by his own conscience. Every decision, every appointment, every forced smile at work seemed insignificant compared to Jason's tragedy. He replayed the boy's scream, the rain, the impact, and that lifeless body on the sidewalk over and over. The millionaire, accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life, realized that some things were irreversible. For the first time, wealth and power offered him no protection from guilt. Even his financial advisors and personal assistants, so effective in the business world, were powerless to soothe his pain. He had failed to protect an innocent life. Determined to take action, Ethan focused on the promise he had made to the Millers, to take care of Lily, Jason's sister. He hired a team of private tutors, ensured comprehensive medical care, and created a safe environment for her. Every action was measured and deliberate, but none could erase the loss. Yet, this work was necessary. Ethan realized that his responsibility wasn't limited to righting a wrong, he had to honor Jason's memory through his actions. He spent hours thinking about what he could do to protect other children, so that no other boy would cry out in vain. This guilt, though overwhelming, became a strength. It transformed his approach to life and wealth. Where he previously saw contracts and profits, he now saw lives to protect, families to support, children to educate and guide. One evening, as he sat in his office, Ethan wrote in his journal, "Jason Miller showed me that courage and sacrifice do not depend on age, money, or power. My wealth must now serve those in need, not myself alone." He knew this road would be long and difficult, but he was ready to follow it. For Jason. For Lily. For every innocent life threatened by the world's indifference. A few days later, Ethan went to the Millers' small apartment to meet Lily, Jason's younger sister. The 9-year-old girl sat silently on the sofa, her eyes red from tears and fatigue. She watched Ethan with a natural mistrust, as if she sensed both his power and his sincerity. "Hello, Lily. I'm Ethan Carter," he said softly, kneeling down to her level. I want to help you. Your brother would have wanted someone to look after you." The little girl stared at him, uncertain. "Why would you want to help me? You don't even know me." Ethan took a deep breath. "Because your brother was brave. He tried to protect you, and I couldn't help him in time. But I can help you now, and make sure you're safe and happy." Lily's eyes filled with tears. She seemed both reluctant and touched. She nodded slowly, accepting the unspoken promise of this wealthy man who, for once, seemed to be acting without ulterior motives. Ethan kept his word. He hired tutors for her education, funded her access to artistic and sporting activities, and ensured that every medical and emotional need was met. More than just material support, he wanted to provide Lily with a safe and nurturing environment, similar to the one she would have dreamed of with Jason. As the weeks passed, a relationship of trust began to develop between them. Lily started to smile again, sharing her stories from school and her memories of her brother. Ethan listened attentively, getting to know the girl better, but also coming to understand the depth of Jason's bravery and sacrifice. One night, after walking Lily home, Ethan stood outside his apartment, reflecting on everything he had undertaken. He realized that his promise went far beyond protecting a child. It represented the moral responsibility to transform his wealth into something truly meaningful. He murmured to himself, almost like a prayer. "I promise you, Jason. I will never let your sister down. I will never let your sacrifice be forgotten." For the first time since the accident, he felt a little peace, a new direction in his life. But he knew that this was only the beginning of a long and demanding road. Months passed, and Ethan Carter was no longer the man he had been before the Jason tragedy. The initial guilt had evolved into a calm and resolute determination. His wealth and influence, which he had once used to negotiate contracts and acquire property, were now being used for a greater cause, protecting children and raising awareness of the invisible dangers that threatened their innocence. Ethan established a foundation dedicated to child safety, funding road safety education programs, after-school activities in disadvantaged neighborhoods, and mentoring initiatives for at-risk youth. Each project was named after Jason, as a tribute to his courage and sacrifice. He attended conferences, met with city officials, and used his network to mobilize resources where they were most needed. His world of luxury hadn't disappeared, but it had become a tool for responsibility and social impact. The skyscrapers he once gazed at to admire his success were now symbols of the influence he could use to serve others. Through these actions, Ethan discovered a new satisfaction, a sense of purpose and contribution that no financial transaction had ever given him. Every child's smile, every life story protected, every educational success reinforced his conviction: true wealth lies in the impact we have on the lives of others. One evening, as he watched Lily in her makeshift mentoring office, Ethan felt a deep emotion wash over him. Lily, now more confident and smiling, was telling the other children the story of her brother, Jason, and the bravery that had inspired so many actions around them. Ethan sat in silence, reflecting on the transformation of his own life. The tragedy that had begun with a desperate cry in the rain had sown a seed of change, and he had chosen to nurture it. This change wasn't just about others, he had changed himself, profoundly, forever. Jason taught me that courage can come from the youngest, and that sacrifice can transform an entire world. Ethan thought, his heart at peace but aware that there was still much to be accomplished. Years passed, but the memory of Jason Miller never faded from Ethan Carter's mind. Every decision he made, every program he funded, every social initiative he launched bore the mark of that courageous boy who had shouted one rainy night, "Don't get in the car." The foundation Ethan had created was growing rapidly. Schools and community centers were now named after Jason, and stories of his bravery were beginning to circulate throughout the city. Children in the most disadvantaged neighborhoods now had access to mentors, safe activities, and an environment where they could grow up without fear of the worst. Lily, now a teenager, was actively involved in these programs. She told the children about her brother's life, his vigilance, his courage, and his sense of sacrifice. Ethan sometimes accompanied her, proudly observing how Jason's memory inspired the young people to be attentive, responsible, and generous. One day, during a ceremony inaugurating a new educational center, Ethan addressed a crowd of children, parents, and community members. Jason Miller was only a 12-year-old boy, but his courage and spirit changed my life, and can change yours. He reminds us that every action, every cry to protect someone, counts. His legacy lives on through us all. The applause rang out, but in Ethan's heart, something else shone brightly, the conviction that Jason's sacrifice had not been in vain. Fear and pain had been transformed into strength and hope. Later, as he walked home, Ethan reflected on everything that had changed since that tragic night. He knew that his life, once centered on power and wealth, had found true meaning. Jason's cry was no longer just a warning, it had become a mission, an inspiration, a living legacy that would continue to touch generations. Ethan finally understood that some tragedies, however painful, could become catalysts for change and transformation. And in every smile of a saved child, in every success of Lily, Jason still lived on. Years had passed since that tragic night when Jason Miller had screamed in the rain. Ethan Carter, transformed by that experience, was no longer the same man. Guilt had given way to a quiet, determined strength, guided by a purpose greater than himself, to protect children and honor Jason's memory. Lily, now a young adult, stood beside Ethan at the foundation's annual ceremony. She spoke confidently to the assembled children, sharing stories about her brother and the lessons he had left behind: courage, vigilance, and generosity. Every word resonated powerfully, and Ethan watched, moved, as Jason's life continued to inspire and transform those around him. After the ceremony, Ethan remained alone for a few moments in the courtyard of the educational center. The sun was setting behind the Manhattan skyline, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. He thought about Jason, about that shout that had changed his life, and about everything he had accomplished since then. He finally felt an inner peace, the kind that comes when you transform pain into action, regret into responsibility. The tragedy that had nearly broken him had become a force for creation and inspiration. Thanks to Jason, he had found the true meaning of his wealth: to serve, to protect, and to give a better future to those in need. Ethan murmured softly, almost as if having a dialogue with the past. "Thank you, Jason, for your courage, for your sacrifice. Your legacy lives on through every smile, every life we touch. You did not cry out in vain." As he walked home, he saw Lily talking to some children, teaching them the values her brother had embodied. Ethan knew that, even in the face of pain and loss, life could hold profound meaning. Jason's memory was no longer a burden, it was a light guiding their way. And for the first time since that rainy night, Ethan felt that peace, the kind that heals and inspires, had finally found its place in his heart.